All right, so let's dig in. Since the Congressman's here, it's my distinct pleasure to start the day by introducing Congressman Maxwell Frost. Congressman Frost is in his first term and is the youngest member of the U.S. Congress at 27 years old, and the first member of Generation Z to be a member of Congress. But that is not why we asked him to come and speak this morning. What's important is that Representative Frost has been on the front lines of the battle for fair insurance rates in Florida, and you can imagine a very big deal. Calling out Governor DeSantis' failure to stand up to the money and power of the industry in a state with the most extreme version of the national homeowners insurance crisis. Representative Frost has been a clear advocate for his constituents and consumers generally, as he gives voice to the critical importance of regulating the insurance industry and investigating to mitigate the destruction of extreme weather events and addressing the disproportionate impact of climate change on communities of color and low-income folks in Florida and around the country. Representative Frost has sought to tackle smaller pocketbook insurance issues, developing legislation to provide protection to consumers who purchase pet insurance, which has long been a product where people do not get the coverage they expect or the value they pay for. I want to thank Representative Frost for his efforts to support and protect consumers, and I welcome him to CFA, so thank you.
Good morning, how's everybody doing?
Morning.
Awesome, well, it's a blessing to be with everybody today. I'm Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost. I have the proud honor of representing Florida's 10th Congressional District, which is my home, Orlando, Florida, Central Florida. It's where I was born and raised. I want to thank Michael and Anna for allowing me to be here today, and the Consumer Federation of America team for having me to speak about our fight for everyday people. I'll tell you, this last year and a half in DC has felt like a decade. This is the most unproductive Congress since the Great Depression, unfortunately. But despite a lot of the dysfunction, we've seen a lot of folks really step forward in terms of protecting consumers and protecting people across the entire country and working class families. And I know in the last few days, y'all have heard a lot about protecting our data online, reining in big tech, and overall what can be done and what Congress needs to do in putting people and consumers first. But seeing as your next panel is about homeowners insurance and fair housing, I thought I'd focus in a little bit on our housing crisis and the crisis that is in front of us today. My district is a district that really grapples with this on many fronts. On the homeowners front, and it was just mentioned, we have a homeowners insurance crisis in the state of Florida. People are being kicked off their insurance. Our state-run insurance has been kicking people off and about to kick a bunch of people off. And we're actually staring down the barrel of one of the worst hurricane seasons we've had in a while. Every year, for the past several years, we've had a once-in-a-100-year storm. A lot of this has to do, obviously, with the climate crisis and the fact that the surrounding water in the state of Florida is the temperature of a hot tub. In case you don't know how hurricanes work, the hotter the water, the larger they are, the longer they survive, and the more destruction that they cause. For folks who don't know, I'm in my first term, and I'm really proud of the work we've done around insurance, homeowners insurance, but also the work we've done around protecting tenants, who are also consumers of renting apartments. We have a shortage of affordable housing and a large number of minimum wage workers who are burdened by the sky-high rent in Central Florida. In fact, in 2021, Central Florida saw the highest increase in housing rates in the entire country. This is something that's really personal for me too. I'll get into that in a second. When adjusting for wages, the greater Orlando area currently is 5th least affordable in the country for housing. And we're the happiest place on earth. Not so happy for everybody. We're talking about folks who can barely afford rent, let alone buy a house. And y'all know oftentimes renting is that precursor to owning, and owning a home is the largest asset a working person's gonna own. My generation's not on track to even own a home. Back at home, I've hosted emergency roundtables where I've heard from local home and business owners and even aspiring homeowners who share their struggles to make ends meet while dealing with the rising cost of insurance. Thousands of Floridians are being dropped from their insurers, and this becomes a clear and present crisis. My parents just got dropped from their insurance actually just a few months ago. My dad called me, he was like, "You need to do something about it." Importantly, it's a crisis that has the power to create a vast and permanent, maybe insurmountable divide between those who can afford to own and insure a home and those who cannot. And the interesting thing about this roundtable is oftentimes this conversation around homeowners insurance, there's kind of a caricature of what a homeowner might look like. What we did in this roundtable is, and we reported it out to the district and made it very public, we had folks there who were in their early 20s. We had seniors there who were living on a fixed income, who were telling me that they have to make a decision in the next few months on whether or not they're gonna have to leave the home that they've been in for the last 50 years because of the insurance crisis specifically. We had working families in there that just had their first children, just got a promotion at work, but looking at having to downsize, sell their home, and go to renting because they can't afford the insurance hikes that are come across the state. And at the same time, our governor and our state legislature are not really fixing the problem and focusing on the problem. Governor DeSantis called a special session a few years ago on this to fix the problem. Unfortunately, they left that special session not only not having fixed the problem, but a lot of people believe, and I'm one of those, that they made it worse. The problem here is we need to regulate the reinsurance market, and the governor is hesitant to do that. And he came out and said that the problem here isn't the market, the problem is the consumers that abuse the system, which accounts for less than 1% of all claims put in. And that's the legislation they passed to crack down on consumers and not regulate the market. And so we're still in this issue in the state of Florida. And so I think it's really important, even though this issue really is a state issue. I always say every issue is a federal issue because we dish out a lot of money. And we need to ensure that we pass legislation to help with this issue across the country, especially in states where they don't want to focus on the problem and they want to blame consumers for everything, like we're doing in the state of Florida. But we need people both up here in DC and in local government and state government who will take on the issue of property insurance, invest in building affordable housing, increase renters' power and consumer power protections and evictions, or not support evictions, support people against evictions, support rent control, rent stabilization, and enact pro-people housing policies. Do we have any Floridians in the room, by the way? Hey, where in Florida are you from? Oh, you're from Orlando! Are you from Orlando?
I'm from Daytona Beach.
Okay, not Orlando, but still cool.
There's somebody over here.
From Florida? No more? Okay. Okay, cool. I just wanted to get a read. Well, if you're from Florida, you know right now that the folks who are supposed to act as watchdogs over the insurance industry are choosing to act more like lapdogs. And it's our people who are paying the price and holding the bag for that. And so that's on the insurance side. On the renters side, we have a crisis in Central Florida and across the entire country too. That's why one of the first bills I introduced was the End Junk Fees for Renters Act. This is a very personal bill for me. During my campaign, well, number one, before I ran for office, I was the national organizing director at March for Our Lives. That's the organization that came after the shooting that happened in Parkland, Florida. Ending gun violence has been one of the fights in my life. I quit my job, thought I had enough money in the bank to run for Congress for a year and a half. I didn't have enough money in the bank to run for Congress for a year and a half. And then the rent hike freeze that was in Florida because of COVID and lockdown was lifted. And I get a text from my landlord, I think it was the day after, that said, hey, next month, your rent's going up 33%. I couldn't afford it. So I moved out, and I put almost all my savings into living in an Airbnb for a few weeks, and I was like, future Max will have it figured out. Future Max did not figure it out. And I was houseless for about 2 months, living on friends' sofas, living in my car, Airbnb here, Airbnb there, and trying to figure it out. And I always told myself, I was like, well, at least when I get to Congress, I won't have to deal with this, Well, as many of you might have heard or might have seen, when I came up here for my orientation to look for housing, not only did I learn I wouldn't get my first paycheck until a month into the job, but I also learned I needed to get a second apartment up here. And I couldn't get a second apartment up here. I kept getting denied, either because I didn't have enough money or because of my credit score, because I ran up my credit cards during my campaign, because I drove Uber during my campaign to make ends meet, and it wasn't enough all the time. And so I applied to new credit cards almost every other week to try to pay my bills. and do this run for Congress. And so I always say this issue of housing, I didn't really choose it, it kind of chose me. And we crafted a bill called the End Jump Fees for Renters Act that's really based on not just my story, but the story of so many renters across the country. This does a few things. Number one, it bans application and screening fees. When I was applying to apartments here in DC, I spent $350 on application fees alone. A lot of them that were not actually refundable. And so I lost out on a lot of that money. It puts an end to late fee profiteering by requiring late fees to apply as credit to the next month's rent, which could be a game changer for so many renters. One of my favorite parts is it prohibits credit score screenings in the rental application process. And as many of you probably know, credit scores are not a good indication on whether or not someone's going to pay their rent or not. Not only is your paying rent not part of the credit score, but rent is really the last thing a working person or a working poor person will cut on when they're trying to make ends meet. The first thing is food. The next thing is medicine. Rent is the last thing. Not a good indication, and it's creating such a huge barrier for our people in being able to rent and have housing. The other thing it does is add more transparency by ending junk fees. What's a junk fee? It's something that your landlord has to provide for you that you're being charged a nickel and dime for. Lawn care, trash care. In fact, one of the most egregious versions of this we saw in Central Florida and across the state of Florida are landlords that charge you $40 to $50 every time you text, call, or email them. This is an actual thing in Florida. We have no tenant protections in our state, by the way. And so what this does is end that junk fee. Now, you know, some people might say, well, what about our mom and pop landlords? Well, most mom and pop landlords don't charge junk fees, and so we really don't have to worry about it. The second thing is, if you really believe you have to charge this $30 a month for lawn care, and you really have to do it, okay, go ahead and do it. Roll it into the rent. So when consumers are online and on Zillow or apartments.com or whatever, they see what they're actually going to pay and not tricked when they're at the end of the process, even whether it's after they sign the lease or when they're about to sign that lease and they're excited and they've stopped searching and they've lost time and money on the search because they've decided, and then they get hit with a bunch of fees. This happened to me just about a few months ago. I moved in Orlando and I was picking up my keys in 2 days, and I get a text from my landlord that says, hey, you need to fill out the HOA application. I forgot about it. I'm like, okay, sure. I go online. It asks for my credit card. I had to pay $200 per occupant in my house to move in. Huge junk fee. The last thing it does is add transparency. And as many of you know, when you're moving into an apartment complex as a consumer and a tenant, your landlord and that leasing company is going to know everything about your life. And how much are you going to know about them? Zip. This would make it so you have a right to know if your landlord's been engaged in any litigation in the past few years as it relates to that building. You'll have a right to know, are there any pest problems in the last few years in that building? These are things that help our consumers have more power in the marketplace, but also be able to make more informed decisions. And so although state and local government, play the main role and significant role in housing policy, there's a lot that we can do at the federal level to incentivize good behavior and obviously create legislation against bad behavior. I support strong enforcement of our existing fair housing protections, which prohibit discrimination in leasing, buying homes, and negotiating house contracts on the basis of race, gender, national origin, etc. And I'm glad to see that President Biden has proposed a rule that would strengthen this enforcement by requiring localities to detail the steps that they are taking to reduce housing discrimination. Housing is a human right. Everybody in our community deserves access to affordable and stable housing, and this helps all of us. It helps our small business owners, which employ 50% of this country. It helps our students, our working families, our seniors, and everybody under the sun. We deserve leaders who are committed to solving this crisis, and you are those leaders too. And so I'm just so happy to be here with you today. I think I might have time to take some questions if anyone has any, and thank you so much for having me.
If you want to ask a question, there's a microphone right in the middle of the room, so please go ahead and introduce yourself and ask a question.
Hi, Congressman. Mike Litt with U.S. FERC. Do you know that a lot of major insurance companies are actually contributing to climate change and the associated risks to consumers because they are underwriting fossil fuel products? And And I'm wondering, what conversations, what are the conversations looking like with folks from the industry that your office is having?
Yeah, thank you. This is a really good topic to bring up, and I think there was a bill just introduced that has to do with holding companies accountable for their contribution to the climate crisis. I haven't had these conversations with the company specifically in Florida as it relates to the climate crisis, because you're right, and it creates this kind of chicken-egg situation. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, and we'll definitely look into it. But your point is there. I mean, we have this crisis going on, and while at the same time that this crisis is going on, we're seeing some of the worst storms we've ever seen. And it's creating a huge issue in Central Florida. I mean, we had a Hurricane Ian 2 years ago, which was one of the longest, worst storms we've had in a long time. It's one of those 100-year storms. And in my district, I still have communities of people who are literally living in their sheds in the back of their home because the flooding went up 6, 7 feet, and the check they got from FEMA was for $9,000. And then they went to go file a claim with their insurance company, and they're saying, oh no, it's something else. It wasn't the wind, it was the flood, or it wasn't the flood, it was the wind. In a hurricane, if you haven't lived through a hurricane, it's everything. we got everything. We get tornadoes in our hurricanes, and there's storms, it's the wind, it's the flooding, it's the storm surge, it's everything. And it's really unfortunate that consumers are being screwed by the insurance companies themselves, even when they have policies that cover, when they have legitimate claims, and that's something else that we're looking into as well. So I appreciate the question on that.
Good morning, Congressman. Thanks for your remarks. Robert Burrell with the Consumer Federation of California. Two quick things I'd like you to comment on. One, we are working on a significant rental junk fees bill in California that is moving through the legislature. California's a full-time state, so it's not done yet. And in our state, we're actually working with our Attorney General's office collaboratively on that approach. Secondly, as someone who used to work for a bunch of years for California's insurance commissioner in the Department of Insurance, our view of what happened in Florida, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, is the insurance industry basically got everything they wanted and then some in the state, and conditions worsened and worsened and worsened as their dreams came true, which are now nightmares for consumers. The concern is that in California, which usually has very high consumer protection standards, we're on the precipice because of this crisis. Not that there isn't some real crisis behind it, but it's also being manipulated and manufactured into making drastic changes that actually look a lot more like what Florida did than what other states should do. I wonder if you can kind of comment on that. To the extent that National Association of Insurance Commissioners exists, our view is that they've become captive to the industry that they're supposed to be regulating and overseeing.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the question, and that my comment with the watchdogs being lapdogs was a comment on kind of what you just said. And I'd like to look a little bit more into what's going on in California for sure. And so we'd probably love to connect on that in our office. I know Adam Schiff has a bill that he's introduced to kind of help with this on the national scale. I would hold up here the Incorporating National Support for Unprecedented Risk and Emergencies, the INSURE Act. But I 100% agree with your assessment. And this is why so many people are being kicked off, and why a lot of these insurance companies are pulling out of the state of Florida, and it's really impacting people in an unprecedented way. After that, a lot of folks got into Citizens, which is our state-run insurance, but the state legislature just passed a law during session a few months ago, actually, to kick a lot of people off, and that roll-off has already started, and we're receiving tons of calls from constituents that are asking, what can you do? Is there a federal version of this that we can get involved in? Because not only we've been kicked off the state-run insurance, but insurance companies are refusing to insure us, and the ones that are, we're receiving bills that are enormous. I mean, some of the rates people have told me that they're being quoted are insane. And so I agree with your assessment. We'll definitely look at what's going on in California, and obviously hope you don't go down the road that we are in. Because you're also a state that deals with a lot of natural disasters.
So I'm Adam Rush from CFA, and that was just a great presentation. Thank you. Really great. The question I had is almost one that you could answer in so many different ways. But yesterday we had a panel about manufactured housing and about just the many things that are occurring in that space. And I'm wondering, Florida is a state with quite a lot of manufactured housing. And just to comment on what you see in terms of situations that consumers are facing. This could be related to climate change and insurance, or park closures, or difficulty getting financing, and where do you think there's room to move forward on protecting those consumers?
I appreciate you bringing this up, and this is actually something that is really important in my district. I have an area of my district called Bithlo, which is a very rural part of my district. Definitely did not vote for me, but we spend a lot of time there. We spent a lot of time there. I actually just opened up a satellite office there, and you know, and it's a very conservative area. But a lot of people come up to me and say, "You're the first congressman we're the first government person we've ever seen in our community." Most of Bithlo is manufactured housing. A lot of that manufactured housing is very old. I'm not sure about federal laws, but you know, I'll give you an example. We have a community that reached out to us they're really scared because, as you know, if you live in a trailer or trailer park, you don't own the land. You know, you're leasing essentially, and you probably own your unit. Well, what we're seeing happen in Florida is a lot of these folks who own the land itself are deciding to sell it to developers to build apartment complexes and things like that. And it's creating the situation where folks who are living in the manufactured housing are receiving a letter that says, "Hey, in 6 months, we need you to get the hell out of here." And so, for instance, we have a community in Central Florida that this is happening to, and it's a huge issue. It's been about 8 months already. They haven't started the construction yet. 1/3 of the people left. And when I've spoken with the leaders in that community, they've pretty much said the people who can leave have left. Everyone who's here does not have a family to go to. And another part is we have a law in the state of Florida where if your trailer is older than 25 or 30 years, you can't move it. Legally, you can't move it to another location. And this is like their only asset that they own. This is their home. And so I think there's a lot of room for this. I actually questioned the Master General on this too, having to do with, I learned so much about manufactured housing being in Bithlo, even the way they receive their mail. And everything being thrown in a bucket. In case folks don't know, in a lot of trailer parks, they receive their mail by it all being thrown in some pile or some bucket or something like that. So I think there's a lot of room to improve our consumer protections for folks in manufactured housing. We actually just got, you know, something we're always thinking about is how can we utilize federal grant money to at least help in our community. And so we just got a grant for $750,000 to build a lot of these small homes. There's somebody who wants to build them in Central Florida for people in Bithlo, specifically for seniors and veterans who cannot move out of their home because it is so old that they can't leave, but have a place to go to. So I appreciate you bringing up the question. This is something that we're exploring and something that's really, you know, a permanent thing in our district. Thank you.
All right, well, let's thank the Congressman for his wonderful work.